There was a night when the war did not end on a battlefield, and no flags were lowered in surrender. No cities fell in flames, and no enemy armies marched in triumph. Instead, the war ended somewhere far quieter. It ended in the mind of a man who could no longer deny what the world around him was already proving. At that moment, no document recorded it. No order announced it. Yet, deep inside Germany's command structure, something irreversible had already happened. The understanding. Not hope, not victory, but the quiet, suffocating realization that the war could no longer be won. Long before Allied troops crossed the Rhine, long before Soviet soldiers reached Berlin. There came a night when even the strongest illusions finally began to crack. In public, Germany still appeared formidable. Armies stood in the field. Trains carried supplies east and west. Factories worked relentlessly under bombing raids. Radio broadcasts promised final victories, secret weapons and decisive counterblows that would change everything. But behind closed doors, confidence had vanished. By late 1942, the war had already taken on a different shape. Reports from the Eastern Front grew darker by the week. Casualty lists stretched longer, yet were rewritten before reaching the highest levels. Entire divisions disappeared into the vastness of Russia, leaving behind nothing but frozen ground and unanswered questions. Truth within the Third Reich had become something to fear. The moment that destroyed any remaining belief in ultimate victory came not with retreat, but with annihilation. At Stalingrad, the impossible happened. An entire German army was surrounded. Over 300,000 men were trapped without hope of escape. Supplies dwindled. Winter closed in. Day by day, discipline eroded as hunger and cold replaced command. The promised rescue never came. When the last pockets of resistance collapsed in early 1943, Germany did not simply lose a battle. It lost the myth that its armies could not be destroyed. Inside the German High Command, the atmosphere changed overnight. There were no speeches, no dramatic outbursts, just silence. Maps were studied longer than necessary. Conversations ended abruptly. For the first time, senior officers spoke privately of outcomes they dared not voice aloud. Stalingrad was not a setback. It was a rupture. From that point forward, the war could only move in one direction. Yet the fighting did not stop. Instead, it grew more desperate. The plans that followed were no longer designed to secure victory, but to postpone collapse. Resources were poured into operations whose goals were symbolic rather than strategic. The appearance of control became more important than control itself. In the summer of 1943, this desperation revealed itself fully. At Kursk, Germany launched its final great offensive in the east. It was meant to restore confidence, to prove that Stalingrad had been an exception. The battlefield chosen was vast, open, and fortified beyond anything previously encountered. What followed was not a breakthrough, but a slow, grinding failure. German tanks advanced into layered defenses prepared in depth. Losses mounted quickly. Fuel ran short. Momentum disappeared. When the offensive was finally abandoned, something fundamental was lost. Germany would never again seize the initiative. From this moment on, it would only react. Within Hitler's inner circle, reality grew increasingly unwelcome. The man who had once dominated briefings with certainty withdrew into obsession. Maps became fantasies. Units that no longer existed were discussed as if they might still arrive. Reports that contradicted his expectations were dismissed as sabotage or weakness. Blame replaced strategy. The enemy was no longer superior numbers or industrial power, but betrayal. Officers were accused of lacking faith. Entire populations were suspected of disloyalty. Reality itself became something to be fought. For the generals, the situation was unbearable. They understood the truth. Germany could no longer win. Its resources were drained. Its enemies were stronger, richer, and united. Every month of fighting only increased the destruction awaiting the nation. But to speak this truth was to invite death. Loyalty had become a trap. Obedience no longer served victory, only prolongation. Some chose silence. Some softened their reports, hoping to minimize damage. A few chose resistance, convinced that removing the leadership might end the suffering. Their efforts failed, and their lives ended with them. As the Allies advanced from the west and the Red Army pushed relentlessly from the east, the pattern repeated across Europe. Cities were declared fortresses not because they could be held, but because retreat was forbidden. Soldiers were ordered to fight for ground that no longer mattered. Civilians paid the price. Entire neighborhoods were erased in battles that could not be won. Refugees flooded roads already crowded with retreating troops. Families fled with what they could carry, unsure where safety might still exist. And still, the war continued. This is the most haunting truth of all. The war did not go on because Germany believed it could win. It went on because fear had replaced reason. Fear of punishment. Fear of chaos. Fear of admitting that millions had already died for nothing. By late 1944, even those closest to Hitler understood that defeat was inevitable. Conversations shifted quietly from strategy to survival. The question was no longer how to win, but how long Germany could endure before everything collapsed. The night Hitler truly knew the war was lost did not arrive with a single message or battle. It arrived gradually. It arrived when plans no longer aligned with reality, when optimism vanished from private conversations, when denial became the final defense against despair. From that point on, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Only the cost remained undecided. When Berlin finally fell, the war had already been over for a long time. What remained was destruction magnified by refusal. Cities reduced to ruins, lives spent in battles that served no purpose except delay. History remembers the end of the war as a moment of surrender. But the true ending came earlier. It came in rooms where men stopped asking how to win and started asking how long they could delay the inevitable. That night matters, because it reminds us that wars are not only lost on battlefields, they are lost when leaders choose denial over truth, when fear outweighs responsibility, and when human lives are sacrificed to preserve illusions. The echoes of that night still reach us today, not as a warning shouted, but as a lesson whispered through history. A lesson paid for by millions who never had a voice in the decision to keep fighting. That is why we remember. That is why we listen. And that is why these stories must never be forgotten. If you believe history is more than dates and battles, if you believe it lives in decisions, silence, and human cost, then you're in the right place. Take a moment to like this video so these stories reach more people who care about memory over noise. Subscribe to Echoes of World War II, the History Vault, to preserve the voices of those who lived through history's darkest hours. Share this story with someone who believes the past still has lessons to teach us. Here, we don't rush history, we listen to it.